want to do it. And they go to the grocery store and they buy goods and food that was produced 1,000 miles away. It was trucked out here either on trains or on trucks or flown out by all people acting voluntarily without coercion. So that's the way society runs. I think we have too many rules right now in place. You do need some rules typically in a large society. The larger it gets, the more you need. But I think there are ways of conducting that with fewer penalties than we have nowadays. The problem is when laws are made, they're basically one-size-fits-all regulations. And the problem is that there's no way to know exactly how 1.3 million people in New Hampshire are going to behave, or 320 million people in the United States are going to behave. You can't make a rule to apply to every single last one of them. It doesn't work. So I think more liberty is what we deserve as a species and as a race in this country. And I'm looking forward to pushing towards that direction as much as we can.
I want to thank you for the question. It's a good one. It kind of brings me back to something I touched on before. Your question was basically, how do you get people to do what you want without the threat of violence? And the answer is persuasion, incentive. If you have something that's a good idea, people are going to come on board. It's no problem. You're going to be able to get people to agree with you if it's persuasive. If you can incentivize people in certain ways, whatever that might mean, like you want to go to school, well, you want to learn something, well, here's what you can do. People are going to have a drive to improve themselves. So incentivizing things that you want people to do is important. Disincentivizing things that you don't want them to do. And incentivizing and disincentivizing them without violence, without turning to the threat of putting somebody in a cage or the threat of physically harming them. So again, as I said before, if you've got a good idea, people are going to come on board with it. The hallmark of a bad idea is that you have to threaten people. So just leave violence out as an option and then start getting creative on how you can actually achieve what it is that you want to do.
I have a quick question for you, Mr. Morrow. So I was just wondering, if you don't tax people to pay for roads, and someone wants to use the road that hasn't paid, what are you going to do to stop them from using it?
Well, again, I'm not interested in forcing a view on anybody, and the roads is a good question. It's a tough question because we're so used to roads being created by the state. So, what would it look like in a world without coercion, in a world without the threat of violence being behind these roads? And there are a lot of different answers to that question that we could possibly throw out there. One thing we can't know is exactly how that would work, but I can throw out some ideas. Like, for instance, business owners have a very serious interest in getting customers to their business, right? So, a road could possibly be sponsored by the business owners that are on that road, for instance, to make sure that their customers have easy access. There's obviously the possibility of advertising on the roads. It's not necessarily, personally I think toll roads are an old bad idea, but tolls are a possibility. I don't think that tolls will end up being the way that is operated, because I think they're very inconvenient, and businesses on those roads are going to want convenience for their customers. So if you can get the road sponsored by billboards or some sort of sponsorship dollars, that's an option. And then also, again, just maybe the business owners would just split the costs of handling that. What do you think, Garrett?
With technology, I don't think that tolls are necessarily going to go away. In fact, we may see more toll roads that are based on some sort of transponder. But I'd like to see these more be entities that are not within the government for their toll roads doing it. If it was a private development, I think it would be much more efficient, because the Easy Pass system, there are a few states that accept it, but it still creates very much of a traffic jam. Even where you do have an Easy Pass, people are still backed up because you got to go a certain slow speed through it. I would love to see roads get more efficient, less intersections and more constant flow. But that's something that requires space, and I think communities are able to solve these issues themselves. The people who live on a certain road have an interest in it being plowed and an interest in it not having potholes. When I was just in Louisiana driving around to New Orleans, there were potholes everywhere, the roads were in terrible condition, and that was a place where people just accept that there's corruption and that certain projects aren't going to be properly paid for and done. And people, I'd say if there were potholes here, I in fact know of a few people who have filled potholes themselves just out of interest in not having to want to drive down a road that's going to ruin their shocks and struts. So, that is one of those issues. The road's a bigger one where it would be nice to look at a better way of doing it that meets everyone's interests and still everyone can chip into.
When you say college,
On the issue of unschooling, I taught for 15 years, and so I'm very passionate about teaching. And I have family members who homeschooled. If society decides that unschooling is an answer and kids are not educated correctly so that they cannot go get jobs, then it's going to be society's responsibility to pay food stamps and unemployment for those kids that can't get jobs because they were unschooled instead of getting the kind of education that they need in order to be successful.
Sure, this is the old objection to not having kids in government school, the idea that, well, there are some parents who don't care about their kids. And that's certainly true. And that's certainly a concern. But those parents are an issue whether you've got government schools or not. And in that case, it has to be the people that know those children who take an interest in their lives and take an interest in helping them learn, even when it seems like their parents don't have that interest. When you actually look at homeschoolers and unschoolers, they're some of the smartest kids out there. At least that's been my experience in knowing them. And certainly, look at the spelling bee, for instance, every year with a national spelling bee, it's almost always a homeschool student that nails that. So I get the concern, but the fear about what some parents might do, to me, isn't justification for using the threat of violence against them. And ultimately, that's what happens if you don't send your kids to the government school or you don't give them some sort of plan, give them something to approve. Then men with guns come, and then your parents get arrested. Now, they might have been bad parents before, but now they're not even there anymore. So I don't think violence makes that situation better. I don't think the threat of violence makes that situation better. And ultimately, that's what's behind government compulsory schooling. Now, to say that we have a free market in education doesn't mean there wouldn't be schools. Obviously, a lot of people value the idea of having kids together in one place. But what we could have in that case would be different schools that focus on different things. I think unschooling is an interesting idea, but it may not be right for every student, in the same way that being in this school may not be right for every student either, because the government system is a one-size-fits-all solution. And a lot of people get left behind because of that, and that's not the intention. I think teachers really care. Every teacher I've ever known really cares about their students, and they really want what's best for them. I was talking with a high school student recently who was pointing out a lot of the wasted time that happens in school. For instance, where you're forced to take classes you're not really interested in because, well, that's the way it is. When was the last time you used algebra in your life?
Well, I guess you use the idea of placeholders, but yeah, I'm pulling out a calculator.
I mean, yeah, I remember when I was in school, they were like, well, you won't always have a calculator with you? Really? Well, we have calculators now, and they're in all of our pockets, probably, so that excuse doesn't work anymore. And, I was pretty decent at math when I was in school, but I haven't used it as an adult. So what if all these young people who are in these classes they're not interested in could focus on things they are interested in, focus their time and their effort on that and build themselves in those areas? I think we'd have even more useful people in the job market that way, because then they could do things more productively and really zero in on the things that are most important to them. What do you think, Mark?
I think that's true. And in any kind of vacuum, you have a lot of innovation that takes place to replace that vacuum or that missing entity. So if all of a sudden there were fewer government schools or public schools, then you'd have more private schools pop up. You would actually have businesses or industries start schools. What we're finding now is a lot of employers are complaining that people right out of high school don't have some of the skills they need to do some of the work at those companies. So let's say companies band together and offer training that is more specific to their particular industries. That way people would get out of those schools and they immediately have some sort of employment. So I think we need more creative approaches and more freedom in the provision of education, and you'll have 1,000 or 1,000,000 different more opportunities and better outcomes ultimately, probably at a lower cost as well.
I think technology is something that really opens up the gates for what we'll be able to do in the near future. Because right now it's not necessary that everyone be in one room to hear one person. People could remotely conference, people could remotely network with one another, and the information is freer than ever. The curriculum's out there. You don't need to pay to go to college anymore if you really wanted to learn the information you would get in college. Now there's still value, I guess, in the degree for some people and the experience, but information freedom is something, I'm a big fan of information freedom. I upload everything, or all of the work that I produce is Creative Commons, which means I'm not claiming copyright. And I'd love to see more people, and we continue to see more people, creating content that is Creative Commons for all people to share and use and disseminate. And that definitely opens up a lot of doors for us.
On the option of unschooling, if it was an option, how do you think the government would decide whether whoever was unschooled has the learning that would require for college? If they had the interest in going to college, how would the government decide whether he had the intelligence to go to college with him being unschooled?
Sure, that's a good question. And the fact is that I don't think it's up to the government to decide whether that person has the skills. The colleges all have their entrance exams. You have the SATs and the ACTs. In a new world where we had fewer people going to public schools, you had more people being homeschooled, you'd have all sorts of alternative testing measures and maybe in-person exams, in-person interviews rather, to go to a college. And you could certainly provide your detailed personal portfolio as to the skills you have at the end of your equivalent of a high school degree. And so we're seeing that happen already, even in the absence of that.
I like what Garrett pointed out, that there's a lot of college curriculum that you can just go online and learn. That you don't necessarily need to go after the piece of paper, this degree, which I think is highly overrated. And I went to college for 2 years and it was a waste of my time and money. I think that if you don't know exactly what you want to do, you shouldn't go to college right out of high school. You really should consider it seriously, especially if you're going to be paying for it. If somebody else is paying for college, then, well, go for it. Have fun. But if you're going to end up with $30,000, $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 in debt, and then all you have to show for it is a piece of paper, do the research out there. You'll find so many stories of young people in their 20s who have a huge load of debt that they have to pay off, and they've got a job as a server at a restaurant, or they're working at some $10 an hour retail job, and they're so disappointed in their experience because they went to college and got a communications degree or some other degree in whatever they thought was cool, but it turns out that it wasn't very useful for them to get a job. So I'd be very, very cautious. There's a real heavy push, especially when it's when you're your age. There's a heavy push from people in education to keep continuing on with this. And I support education. Like I said, you can go out and educate yourself as much as you want. We have the internet today, and lots of college curriculum is there. You can take the very same college curriculum for free and get all of the learning without necessarily having their little piece of paper at the end. And then you've got all your money in your pocket, and rather than having $50,000 in debt. We're about done, right? How many more minutes? 2 minutes?
I just have to bring my class back to the end.
Do we have time for a closing statement from these folks? All right.
All right, well, yeah, thanks again, everybody, for coming down here. I hope that we've kind of provided a little bit of an alternative for people, things that you can do yourselves to, if you see an issue or if there's something that's important to you, to either gain attention to or to get more minds on and more people thinking about it. Cameras are always getting cheaper, laptops are always getting cheaper, editing video isn't hard, editing articles, posting them isn't hard. So I'd encourage people to take advantage of the times we live in and make objective records of the world around you to make it a better world.
Yes, thank you for coming by today. And don't forget, we do have the stuff on the table on the way out there. There's some really interesting flyers. Please help yourselves. I don't care if we go back with no flyers. We've got hundreds more back in Keene. So don't take a plea deal. Information's there. Also, there's a great warning flyer from Cop Block, from Keene Cop Block, which is all about knowing your rights. So if you don't know your rights, or even if you think you know your rights, when it comes to dealing with the police, you really should take that flyer if you get a chance, right back there on the table. And again, you can find me at freetalklive.com. That's my radio show. I also blog at freekeen.com. So if you want to learn more about some of the stuff we're doing, those are two great websites to do that.
Thank you for attending and appreciate your interest today. You can start doing informational education on your own now and do some investigation research online on things that are working for liberty, and let's push back a little bit against big government and start exercising our liberty while we're here at home. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.